7-6 Reina's weird divine protections. Third POV. Every single assassin had been defeated, some on the brink of death, others unconscious or incapacitated entirely. Incredible. How are you this strong? You were only born a few months ago. It doesn't make sense to Betty. In fact, Beatrice exclaimed, her voice cracking with shock. Her disbelief was genuine and raw. Gloria scoffed, flipping her shimmering hair with pride. HMPH. None of you are worthy of comparison to this concubine, she replied arrogantly, then floated gracefully back to Subaru's side. Subaru, who had been silently observing, finally spoke with a tone of admiration. That was impressive, Gloria. You completely shattered my expectations. Gloria beamed, clearly pleased with herself, basking in both his praise and her own overwhelming display of power. Though Subaru seeing assassins barely alive, he sprung forth into action. How can he let his employees die? Aqua, quickly, start healing them. Betty, Gia, you two help as well. Subaru barked out the command, wasting no time as he hurried to the side of the mutilated assassins lying barely alive. Elsa, who had just returned from her scouting mission, stood frozen in place, horrified by the gruesome sight before her. The sheer brutality made even the notorious Bowel Hunter falter in dread. She wasn't scared by the fact how they were nearly dead, but by the possibility that Subaru probably had no qualms from torturing them. Among Subaru's spirit companions, it was not only Aqua who had the ability to wield healing magic. Both Betty and Gia also possessed healing capabilities, though neither of them could hold a candle to Aqua's healing magic. As for Subaru himself, he hadn't attempted healing magic since the death of the white whale. Before that event, he had given it a try but quickly discovered that he lacked any affinity for water or healing magic altogether. Thankfully, Reina also joined in the efforts. Drawing upon her divine blessing of healing, she channeled the power from her divine protection to support the magical recovery process. With the combined effort of Aqua, Betty, Gia, and Reina, they were eventually able to stabilize and patch up all of the injured assassins, dragging them back from the brink of death. Father, these fools aren't even strong enough to leave so much as a scratch on this concubine, Gloria remarked coldly, brushing a lock of her golden hair behind her ear with disdain. Her words stung. The assassins, though still in pain and barely able to move, couldn't help but feel bitterness at the blatant insult. Fear crept within them. The fact they proved to be utterly weak in front of Gloria made them wonder if they will be discarded, however recalling they have been healed from the brink of death assured them that they still had their use in Subaru's eyes. It doesn't matter, Subaru said, his voice calm but resolute. They will do just fine for dealing with weaker enemies. Their strength, though not top tier, will suffice for now. He then turned his attention to Elsa, gesturing for her to approach. Elsa, come here. The infamous Bowel Hunter stepped forward with a nod, silently awaiting his next command. Listen well, Subaru continued. All of you are to form a contract, binding, absolute. You will swear not to betray me under any circumstances. In return, I'll provide you with generous wages and as much freedom as you desire, so long as your actions don't go against my will or compromise my goals. He made no effort to dress up the terms or sugarcoat the conditions. He spoke with the blunt honesty of a man who knew the kind of people he was dealing with: assassins, mercenaries, survivors. Clear rules, clear rewards, and clear consequences. After delivering a few more detailed instructions and giving the command to Elsa, Subaru finalized their mission objectives. 3 of the assassins would remain in Arlem village. Their task was to blend in as ordinary villagers while secretly acting as the first line of defense against spies or enemies who might seek to sabotage Amelia's camp. The rest would be dispatched to the capital, where they would begin forming a covert assassination and espionage network, one that would serve Subaru's interests from the shadows. He had no illusions about the nature of the people he was dealing with. Asking assassins to stop assassinating altogether was naive and a waste. Instead, Subaru set a clear boundary for their actions. Only corrupt nobles, degenerate criminals, or particularly vile slum dwellers were to be targeted. No innocent blood would be spilled, not under his command. And so, the groundwork for Amelia's political campaign began to take shape. With her first public speech successfully delivered in Arlem village, Subaru decided it was time to personally travel to the city now under his control. Originally, his plan was to have Amelia continue her tour through the surrounding villages, building up goodwill gradually before reaching the urban centers. But the slow communication systems of this world provided a unique advantage. Subaru chose to capitalize on this by going ahead to the city himself, intending to clean out the corruption, criminal elements, and slave traders. While Amelia, accompanied by Reina for protection, would remain at the city mansion preparing for her major speech and policy announcements, Subaru, alongside Gloria, would covertly inspect the city's underbelly. Their goal was to identify and eliminate any traces of illegal activity. Of course, Reina wasn't thrilled about this arrangement. As the carriage rolled along, drawn by sturdy horses and driven by one of the contracted assassins, the atmosphere was heavy with anticipation. Inside the vehicle sat 5 people: Subaru, Reina, Amelia, Gloria, and Beatrice. "My liege, may I come with you instead?" Reina asked respectfully. "Miss Gloria and Beatrice can stay by Miss Amelia's side." "I'm sorry, Reina," Subaru replied with a small but resolute smile. "But you're the best person for this job. Everyone back at the mansion is already busy with their own assignments. You being with Amelia not only guarantees her safety but also helps maintain the illusion that I'm not in the city at all. It's a tactical move." Reina clearly didn't like the plan, but she respected it. If Subaru was anything, he was meticulous. He had accounted for every possibility. His true intention was simple: to cleanse the city of its rot, slave traders, corrupt officials, criminal elements, and all. And, as fortune would have it, though it had been announced far and wide that the city had come under his rule, not a single soul there had ever laid eyes on Subaru Natsuki. It was the perfect cover. However, Reina was far too well known to accompany Subaru on this particular mission. Her presence was not subtle. Her appearance, demeanor, and reputation were all recognizable, and that made her a poor fit for any task requiring stealth or anonymity. At least, not for this job specifically. If she were seen prowling around the city at Subaru's side, it would immediately alert any observant individuals that something was afoot. That's why having her accompany Amelia to the city's mansion was a tactical masterstroke. Her visibility served as a valuable tool, one that would help to weave the illusion that Amelia's visit was the entirety of the inspection team. The locals, particularly those with something to hide, would believe that only Amelia and Reina had come to oversee the city and deliver new governmental policies. No one would suspect that the true mastermind, Subaru, was already in the city, watching from the shadows. This created the perfect smokescreen. All the city's corrupt officials, underground dealers, black market leaders, and slavers would be on their best behavior only in front of Amelia and Reina. They would focus all their energy on staying presentable, hiding their crimes behind fake smiles and falsified records, completely unaware that Subaru would be slipping through the cracks, unseen, hunting them from the darkness like a phantom. It was a carefully laid trap, and they wouldn't even realize they were being hunted until it was too late. Unfortunately, Beatrice would not be joining him in a visible form either. Her presence, while valuable, would draw far too much attention. Her distinctive appearance, plush dress, drill-like twin tails, and most importantly her eyes with butterfly-shaped pupils will give away that she is a spirit or something unusual. Therefore, she had no choice but to retreat into Subaru's soul space once again, remaining out of sight until the moment her power was truly needed. "I see," Reina sighed softly, her voice barely above a whisper as she gazed out the carriage window. Then, almost involuntarily, she thought, if only I had a divine protection that allowed me to observe him from afar, at any time, from anywhere. And in that exact moment, as if responding to the yearning in her heart, the bond she shared with Odd Laguna flared to life with a radiant pulse. Divine protection of the Yandere lover's stocking has been acquired. Reina blinked, her eyes widening as the words imprinted themselves on her mind like a magical brand. Yandere, lover, what even is a Yandere? And stocking, what kind of divine protection is this supposed to be? Her face immediately flushed a deep crimson. An intense wave of secondhand embarrassment washed over her, and she lowered her head, hiding her expression from the others in the carriage. Lately, the divine protections granted to her by Odd Laguna had grown increasingly peculiar. In fact, many of them bordered on outright absurdity. There was the divine protection of the lover's side, which allowed her to appear next to Subaru at any moment, as long as he desired her presence, or sometimes even if he didn't. She could also sense his emotional state and hear his unspoken calls for her through an empathic link. Then came the divine protection of Ho sensing, which triggered a visceral alert whenever an untrustworthy or manipulative woman approached Subaru with less than pure intentions. The most mortifying one by far had been the divine protection of anti-cucking. She had acquired it shortly after discovering the bizarre and confusing fact that Echidna had somehow become Subaru's magical slave. The protection essentially ensured that Reina could not be cucked, romantically betrayed, under any realistic circumstance. And if such a scenario did occur or was in progress, she would be alerted instantly through a divine emergency notification, complete with magical panic sirens in her head. Then there were the last two, which she barely dared to think about. The divine protection of bedroom wiles, a blessing that enhanced her seductive instincts and intimate charm, even though she had virtually no experience in those matters aside from basic biological knowledge. And the one she still didn't understand, the divine protection of ultimate anahole. She didn't even know what the word, anahole, meant. The term sounded completely foreign and suspiciously indecent, yet the divine protection unambiguously improved her submissive bedroom skill set, according to the information provided through her mental interface. She hadn't dared ask anyone about it. Ahem. These divine protections were ridiculous, undeniably, and Reina was the first to admit that, though only to herself. No one else knew about them, and she intended to keep it that way. It was her secret burden, her hidden arsenal. And now she had acquired another divine protection of the Yandere lover's stocking. With a mix of curiosity and dread, she mentally examined its effects. To her astonishment, it granted her a full third-person omniscient perspective of Subaru's surroundings at will. She could monitor him from afar, observe his environment, listen in on his conversations, and even assess his vitals and mental state. It was like she had an invisible surveillance drone permanently trained on him. Technically, Odd Laguna gave her the option to reject divine protections she no longer wanted. She could discard this one if she really desired. She could get rid of all of them if she felt they were too invasive, too strange, or too embarrassing. But no one else knew about them, right? No one else could see her notification log, or sense her mental links, or guess the extent of her divine advantages. And if these blessings helped her become a better guardian, a better support, and, a better lover for Subaru, then wasn't it worth enduring a little embarrassment? Yes, that's right. It was all for the greater good. The greater romantic and emotional good, that is. Thus, Reina quietly accepted yet another bizarre and absurd divine protection into her growing, chaotic collection. With a red face and a pounding heart, she committed herself once again to her all-encompassing role as Subaru's protector, shadow, and, whether fate liked it or not, his future wife. Even if the world itself had to bend its divine laws to make it happen. To be continued. I know I get sick easily, but which guy was saying I was sick again? I mean, I did have a splitting headache every day. But it doesn't means I was sick. I was just busy, okay. Anyway, here is the chap and give the power stones, so others can know this book is back. As long as it is in top 30 it will do the job. And no. My fire to write this FIC hasn't subsided. I have still not reached the point where our Subaru meets NB Subaru. I still think about it every night with anticipation. Until then you can rest assured. Also I read some fics recently, Fate fics. The one with nature, and Fate canon, and so in burst of inspiration, I ended up writing a new FIC. It is Fate. Almighty, I found there are some similar fics after I wrote these. It is basically MC starting at the beginning of the creation of the world, getting overpowered, surprisingly realistic, traumatized character yet not the guy who goes all weak and helpless, etc., etc. Mick will get a gotcha system, which will actually support him to get independent of the system after a few times, or at least lower his dependency on it by a lot. MC will also use the gotcha spins in a way you may or might not expect. This will be harem, but like this FIC, not like Fate Gotcha or in Mushoku Tensei with unique skill great sage fix. Mick hates father and sisters, or concept of them. He loves his mother, he also is wary of women. Do not worry, I am not the author of Rent a Girlfriend, I know how to give my Mick character development. Anyway, I will not upload it. Anyway, should I create Patreon? I will be starting small, for this FIC 5 chaps in advance for $2. Will you sign it? 16 comments 0 vote. 77 finally in the city. How about some chapter comments? Just to make it a bit livelier. Third POV. Before arriving at the bustling city of Altenburg, Subaru, along with Gloria and Beatrice, parted ways from Amelia and Reina. In preparation for their covert entry, Subaru's group took on the appearance of ordinary commoners, deliberately dressing in modest attire to avoid attracting unnecessary attention. Beatrice, however, found herself in a rather unfortunate position. She had to reside temporarily within Subaru's spiritual core. It wasn't an ideal situation, but she at least had the company of other spirits, though most of them had taken to slumber within Subaru's soul, conserving their strength and focus for the pursuit of becoming great spirits. Their silent presence was a strange comfort to Beatrice, even if it meant she couldn't interact them. Not to mention just being inside Subaru made her feel warm and not alone. Subaru himself donned a simple gray shirt and black pants, plain, practical, and deliberately forgettable. If not for his exceptionally handsome face, the rare color of his black hair and the equally uncommon shade of his eyes, he could have passed off as an ordinary background character in the city's daily life, a mere mob in the crowd. But Gloria, she had a way of standing out, even when attempting to appear modest. Though she refrained from choosing overly lavish clothing, her outfit still highlighted her elegance and commanding presence, drawing the eyes of anyone nearby. Her dress was a rich wine red, hugging her form in a style reminiscent of a noble's corset gown. The design boasted golden trimmings that adorned the waistline and skirt, subtly emphasizing her graceful figure. Her sleeves were puffed in pure white, creating a striking contrast with the deep red of her dress. A delicate golden brooch sat at the center of her chest, adding an ornamental charm to the ensemble. Atop her head was a white, ruffled headband, resembling something between a maid's accessory and a noblewoman's hairpiece. A part of Subaru internally grumbled that, despite her efforts, the gold accents and the brooch made her attire seem a bit too extravagant for a commoner. Yet the slightly faded tone of her dress hinted that she wasn't a noble either, more like a well-to-do commoner or perhaps a high-ranking servant wearing her best garments for a special occasion. Fufu, struck by this concubine's beauty, father. Gloria teased with a light, flirtatious tone that only she could pull off so naturally. Subaru chuckled in response, shaking his head with a small smile. You certainly look magnificent, Gloria. Well, I suppose I'll let it slide. It might even work to our advantage. After all, attracting the sort of troublesome people we're hunting might just become easier. Realizing that her flashy presence would likely ruin any chance of them blending in like unnoticed commoners, Subaru decided to adjust his approach. If they couldn't go unseen, perhaps it was better to draw attention, specifically from those with ill intent. Gloria's attire might just make her seem like a well-off commoner, the kind who flaunts their best on rare outings. That image might lure in exactly the sort of wastrels they were looking for. Still, he didn't like the thought of strangers ogling his daughter. That fact alone made him slightly uneasy. Unfortunately, he cannot gouge the eyes of everyone eyeing his daughter. Suddenly, Gloria reached out and took his hand, guiding it between her ample chest with a warm, affectionate smile. Father, considering your plan, my usual manner of speech might be a bit too eccentric, she said thoughtfully. So, this concubine has decided to assume a more fitting role. What do you think about pretending to be a young couple for the time being? Subaru blinked in surprise at her sudden suggestion but ultimately shrugged. I suppose that's fine. It could help us avoid suspicion. Gloria's face lit up with delight, her smile stretching from ear to ear. Though it was just a ruse, she fully intended to play her role to perfection. Very well then, honey, she said sweetly, altering her tone slightly as she leaned in with a sparkle in her eyes. Let's not keep the city waiting. Subaru was momentarily caught off guard by how naturally she adapted her manner of speech, but he quickly composed himself and accepted the act as part of their cover. As they approached the city's entrance, they joined a short line of wagons and travelers standing before the gates. The city of Altenburg loomed ahead, modest in scale but still lively. It was home to approximately 5,000 to 6,000 inhabitants, a far cry from the massive capital or the other major cities, each teeming with populations nearing 100,000. The city walls were just over a meter in height, a paltry barrier when compared to the towering fortifications of the royal capital. They seemed more symbolic than defensive, offering only a token sense of security. From the moment Subaru and Gloria arrived at the gates, they became the center of attention, especially Gloria. Her otherworldly beauty couldn't be masked, no matter how simply she dressed. Eyes followed her wherever she walked, and even in a line of strangers, she stood out like a star among candles. As they reached the checkpoint, one of the guards immediately took notice. His gaze lingered a bit too long on Gloria, then shifted to Subaru with a disbelieving expression that practically screamed, "Why does he get to be with her?" The second guard, at least, kept his composure. Clearing his throat, he addressed them in a professional tone. Ahem. State your names and your reason for entering the city. Without a word, Subaru reached into his pocket and pulled out a silver coin, offering it discreetly to the questioning guard. The man glanced at it, smirked knowingly, and nodded in understanding. Let them through. Special entry, he said casually, motioning them forward. As the two guards exchanged chuckles, already daydreaming about the alcohol and meat that the coin would buy them, Subaru maintained his calm expression. Internally, however, he was less than impressed. Gloria sneered in her mind, her opinion of the guards dropping further with every second. These are the ones protecting the city. Subaru thought with a faint grimace. Looks like I'll have to do something about this situation later on. As they passed through the gates, the main road lay strangely clear, a rare sight. Subaru quickly realized the reason. The streets had been cleared in anticipation of Reina and Emilia's formal arrival, a procession that demanded both security and grandeur. Let's take a closer look at this place, Gloria, Subaru said mentally, his senses sharpening. Let's see what life here is like from the viewpoint of the common folk. As you command, Father, Gloria replied in kind, her eyes glinting with intent. However, this concubine shall personally discipline those mongrels who neglected their duties so shamefully. Meanwhile, Far from the city's modest streets, Reina's brows twitched uncontrollably as she tapped into her divine protection to observe Subaru from afar. A growing irritation bubbled within her. Just what did she witness? That girl shamelessly took advantage of her position as Subaru's self-proclaimed daughter and his contracted spirit. How dare a mere great spirit take such liberties with her lord in her absence? Though Reina had already steeled herself to accept Subaru's mysterious and elusive lover, whose origins she could not yet trace, she had firmly resolved that no other woman would get close to her beloved unless they had proven themselves worthy in every possible way. Unacceptable, she fumed internally, her golden eyes narrowing with fiery resolve. Next time, I won't just stay for a day. No, I shall spend an entire week by my lord's side. Her declaration echoed silently in her heart as she tried to wrestle down her jealousy and frustration. Fortunately for Reina's current mental state, she remained blissfully unaware of the darkest secret. Subaru's other lover was none other than the Demon King herself, the Witch of Envy. Elsewhere in Altenburg, Gloria and Subaru continued their exploration of the city, walking side by side through narrow cobblestone streets. The architecture here was humble yet charming. Most of the houses had 2 or 3 stories and were constructed from a mix of sturdy wood and coarse-cut stone. The structures carried an old-world charm, slightly weathered but enduring, like the city itself, quiet, small, but not without its soul. Their steps eventually led them to a local tavern. Subaru had deliberately chosen it, wanting to gain a sense of the city's undercurrents, by tasting its food and listening to the idle gossip of its people. A tavern, after all, was a place where secrets slipped between lips like wine from a cup. As they pushed open the wooden doors and entered the lively establishment, a few heads turned to glance at them. Subaru, dressed plainly in gray and black, didn't garner much attention despite his striking features. His appearance, though handsome, was buried beneath the veil of simple clothing, just as planned. However, when their eyes landed on Gloria, the atmosphere changed. Her ethereal presence, the dignified way she carried herself, and the radiant beauty she possessed stunned several patrons into silence. Conversations paused. Cups lingered halfway to mouths. She might not have been wearing a noble's attire, but she certainly looked every bit the part. Subaru and Gloria found 2 empty chairs near a modest table by the wall and sat down. Damn, she looks like a noble, a rough-looking demi-human muttered under his breath. If she was a noble, she wouldn't be sitting in a place like this, another snorted in reply, though the tone in his voice betrayed uncertainty. Moments later, the tavern's hostess, a woman in her early 30s with a no-nonsense expression, approached their table and greeted them with a practiced smile. Her eyes flicked briefly between Subaru and Gloria, a spark of curiosity igniting within them. Good day to you, sir and madam, she said warmly. Are you two a couple? Her question was genuine, but her thoughts were running wild. With Subaru's dashing looks and Gloria's unearthly beauty, the two looked like a perfect pair, a match woven by fate itself. Gloria smiled gracefully, clasping Subaru's hand in hers. Indeed, we are husband and wife, she replied with natural elegance. This is our first time visiting this city. We've come in search of work. I see, the hostess murmured, suppressing the tiniest sigh of resignation. Of course, all the handsome ones are always taken. Her gaze briefly flicked across the tavern to a group of men gawking like starved wolves, and she shook her head in exasperation. And I'm stuck with these buffoons. You lot, she barked suddenly, turning her frustration toward the men whose eyes hadn't left Gloria. Stop staring at the lady like that. You're making them uncomfortable. The scolded men looked away awkwardly, a few scratching their heads or pretending to be suddenly very interested in the wooden floorboards. TCH, seriously, this guy's so lucky, one man muttered under his breath. To have a wife like that, if I had someone half as beautiful, I'd follow her every command without a word. Don't you have a wife? Another asked with a raised brow. Yeah, but she just nags me all day, the first man sighed, defeated. The hostess, still standing near Subaru's table, clicked her tongue in disapproval. Don't pay attention to them, sir, she said firmly. They're just a bunch of idiots. If they give you any trouble, just call me, I'll toss them out myself. Subaru gave her a respectful nod. Thank you, miss. That's reassuring, he said with a faint, appreciative smile. He hadn't expected such a reaction from a complete stranger, but it was a reminder that not all people were corrupt or careless. As they waited for their food to arrive, more patrons filtered into the tavern. The lunch hour was drawing near, and with it came louder conversations and a livelier crowd. Subaru leaned back slightly, allowing his ears to pick up bits of dialogue around them, hoping to catch something of interest. I heard the royal candidate Amelia and the sword saint are in the city, said one man at a nearby table, his voice lowered as if sharing a piece of precious gossip. Really? Why would they come to a small place like this? Another responded, sounding skeptical. Just then, the hostess returned, carrying a wooden tray. She carefully placed a pair of bowls filled with steaming vegetable soup and slices of coarse bread in front of them. Miss, Subaru said casually, choosing the moment to prod for more information, there's talk that some important guests are visiting the city. Is that true? The hostess gave a small nod. Yes, apparently one of the royal candidates and the famed sword saint are in Altenburg. No one's sure of the reason yet, but it's why the main road was blocked off this morning. She glanced at them curiously. You two are new here, right? Indeed, Subaru replied smoothly. We're curious about the affairs of the city, especially since it may become our home for a while. While they spoke, Gloria sampled the soup, her expression neutral at first, then she gave a satisfied nod. The seasoning is a bit mild, she murmured to Subaru, but it's far from unpleasant. The tavern buzzed with talk, the scent of food and ale growing stronger with every passing minute. Outside, the city lived on in its simple rhythm, unaware that beneath the surface, its newest visitors were anything but ordinary. I have some work to take care of, so unfortunately, I won't be able to assist you personally, the hostess said thoughtfully, glancing between Subaru and Gloria. However, I can arrange for you to sit with some familiar faces. They've lived here for a long time, they should be able to help you out. Oh, by the way, she added with a warm smile, my name is Hilda. I'm the daughter of the tavern's owner. Without waiting for a response, she raised her voice and called out to a middle-aged man seated a few tables over, surrounded by a handful of locals chatting and eating heartily. Hey, Burlard, these two are new in town, why don't you and your friends invite them over for a chat? She suggested, her voice loud enough to be heard over the general hum of the tavern. Burlard, a sturdy man with a short gray beard and the relaxed posture of someone who had seen his fair share of life, looked over at Subaru and Gloria. He gave them a once-over and shrugged with a good-natured smile. They're not familiar faces, that's for sure. New arrivals, he said, gesturing toward the open seats around him. Well then, come join us. We'll show you the ropes around here and give you a proper introduction to Altenburg. Burlard wasn't stupid. He understood right away that Hilda was subtly asking him to take these newcomers under his wing, at least temporarily. In cities like Altenburg, where the local customs and governance differed significantly from those of rural villages, newcomers often needed guidance. People from larger cities usually managed well on their own, but those from the countryside, like these two were pretending to be, were often lost without someone to steer them. Subaru and Gloria rose from their seats, and Hilda kindly helped them shift their food to the new table. Subaru offered a polite nod. My name is Theo, and this is my wife, Gloria, he said, introducing themselves under their assumed names. We've just arrived in the city today. As the words left his mouth, Subaru felt a twinge of embarrassment. This really was the kind of cliché one would read in a cheesy play. A supposedly wealthy man disguising himself as a commoner for some mysterious purpose. Still, in their case, it wasn't entirely baseless. As the introductions concluded, Burlard and the others welcomed them warmly. Soon, the conversation turned to the city itself. Villages are one thing, Burlard began, leaning on the table with one arm as he spoke. But cities like Altenburg, they work on a whole different set of rules. Everything's faster, harsher, more crowded. You'll need to be sharp, or the place'll swallow you whole. As they continued talking, various opinions and local sentiments started to emerge. Honestly, a half-elf is a royal candidate. At first, we all thought it was some kind of twisted joke, Burlard said, shaking his head slowly. Most folks here were stunned when the announcement came out. I always thought Lady Karsten was the obvious choice. But things are changing, added another man sitting beside him. Ever since Lord Zero, that's what people call him now, started defeating all those calamities, he's become a legend. When we heard Altenburg would come under his rule, most of us were relieved. If nothing else, we figured we'd be safer. The royal candidate, Lady Amelia, is visiting the city, another man piped in. Even the famed sword saint is here. That's how serious things are now. All the big shots are gathering. Subaru listened carefully, subtly gauging the public's feelings toward Amelia. After spending some time with the locals, he could clearly sense the complex web of emotions swirling beneath the surface. There was still hesitation, suspicion, and even some prejudice. Yet, at the same time, there was a growing sense of acceptance, or at least tolerance. The shift in perception wasn't entirely organic. Amelia's standing had improved largely because of multiple factors aligning perfectly. Subaru's own influence, Rosewall's political maneuvering, and Reina's indirect support all played a part. Not to mention Subaru's recent heroic deeds had done wonders for their image. If even one of those things had been missing, the people likely wouldn't have accepted the idea of a half-elf ruler. not in a world still haunted by dark memories of the past. What made it even more interesting was the political evolution currently taking place. For the first time, the voices of commoners were being acknowledged in matters of national importance. 1,000 commoners' votes might only equal that of a low-ranking noble, but the very fact that the masses now had a say, even a minor one, was monumental. It represented a shift in power, a move toward a more inclusive system. Well, a country doesn't change in a day or two, Subaru thought to himself, sipping from his wooden cup. As he ate, Subaru took mental notes on the state of common life. Up until now, ever since he arrived in this world, he had been surrounded by nobles, knights, and aristocrats. Lavish meals and soft bedding had become so routine that he barely gave them a second thought. But now he tasted reality. The food set before him, while warm and filling, was completely different. The soup was thin but salty, containing a modest mix of vegetables and chunks of potato, or perhaps tattos, as they were called in this world. The bread, while not as hard as a brick, was certainly not soft. It was dry, slightly tough to chew, and had little to no flavor. Guess it's too much to expect gourmet meals in a medieval city, Subaru mused grimly. No wonder spices were worth their weight in gold back in Earth's Middle Ages. Europe waged war just to get their hands on Indian spices. Back then, European cuisine wasn't really cuisine, it was just something to eat, to survive, and to, well, dump later. After finishing their food and saying their goodbyes to Burlard and the others, Subaru and Gloria exited the tavern and stepped out into the sunlight. Gloria, Subaru said telepathically, let's book an inn first. Then we'll split up and inspect the city separately. That way, we can cover more ground. As you command, Father, she replied with a nod, not questioning his judgment. They made their way through a few winding streets and finally found a modest-looking inn catered toward commoners. It wasn't fancy by any means, but it was exactly what they needed for their cover. The cost was 10 copper coins for a single room, cheap, by noble standards. Fortunately, Subaru had come well prepared. He had already exchanged currency earlier and carried ample change in both silver and copper coins. As they stepped inside their room, the difference between this place and the inns they were used to in the capital was stark and undeniable. Back in the capital, they had rented several interconnected rooms with a spacious lounge. The guest area had been fully furnished with luxurious carpets, elegant sofas, glass windows, polished tables, floral vases, and everything a noble heart could desire. Here, a cramped room with barely enough space to stretch out. One narrow bed meant for 2 people, a small wooden cupboard, and an old wooden floor. The walls and ceiling bore traces of dust and age, though the floor seemed reasonably clean. A small, cracked window allowed a peek into the alley outside, but that was the only source of light besides a dim oil lamp. Subaru sighed deeply. The difference in lifestyle between nobles and commoners, it's huge. For a fleeting moment, he felt like one of those out-of-touch nobles who dismiss the struggles of the lower class without a second thought. Gloria, thankfully, didn't complain. She simply looked around the room, then smiled faintly. To me, Father, the value of a place is not determined by its luxury, she said softly, but by the hearts of the people who dwell within it. And since Subaru will stay here, it would be no doubt a first-class place to her. Subaru gave her a nod of appreciation. That was Gloria for you, elegant in appearance, but sharp and steady in heart. They decided to rest for a little while before heading out to begin their investigation in earnest. The city awaited, and there was still much to uncover. To be continued. I hope you liked the chapter. Now give the Power Stone so people can know that this FIC has started uploading again. Also, I hope you like the details. I often see people leave out the food, clothes, society, houses in the fanfics. It helps to build the world, and to be honest, this FIC started as very fast-paced. If I would have gone slow-paced, I would have lost the interest, but now that we are at a part where I can expand the details of the story, I think it is fine. Some people are also complaining about Reina's jealousy. I guess as an author I really find it hard to see the problems, seriously, when you write something and unless it is SI you think everything is perfect fine and people won't be triggered at some parts. It isn't SI, to be honest. The character I am writing is something I want to strive to become. A mature, realistic yet gentle person, still cold and cruel when needed. Passionate, and somewhat goal-driven. But it is just a dream, I would like to be just myself, and see how it goes. I won't suggest you becoming Noah, Neo or Arthur. It is cool because it is FIC, you aren't heavenly defying handsome that women will fall for you, or are willing to stay with you forever, wake up to the reality. Poseidon and Aren are acceptable, but we are living in modern society so Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the chapter. 20 comments 0 vote. 78 their point of view. Third POV. A few hours earlier. After parting ways with Subaru, Gloria, and Beatrice, the carriage carrying Reina and Amelia had arrived in front of the city's gates ahead of the others. Their carriage driver wasted no time in presenting a noble insignia to the stationed guards, raising his voice with formal authority as he declared, "The royal candidate Amelia and the Sword Saint Reina are visiting the city under the auspices of Marquis Zero." The guards exchanged a glance and nodded without hesitation. They had been informed of the visit in advance, a full day prior, and had taken the necessary steps to prepare for the distinguished guests. In anticipation of their arrival, the city's main road leading directly to the central mansion had been cleared of all other carriages and vehicles. This was done to ensure an unimpeded and dignified passage for the visiting nobility. The entire process of clearing the way had already been completed the previous day, following the notice of their arrival. All commoners and travelers seeking to enter the city had been halted where they stood. No other carriages would be permitted entry until Amelia's official carriage passed through and a designated half-hour had elapsed. It was a strict, if temporary, hold on all movement into the city. If this had been one of the great cities of the kingdom, those brimming with powerful noble houses, bustling trade, and dense populations, such an elaborate reception might not have been possible or even considered necessary. However, this was a relatively small city, modest in size and scope, governed largely by baronial houses and minor nobility. As such, a show of formality and reverence for high-ranking visitors was both feasible and politically advantageous. The barons themselves did not live within the city proper. Instead, they resided in castles just a few kilometers beyond its outer limits, protected by strong stone walls and surrounded by vast, manicured gardens. These estates were also in proximity to farming villages and open farmland, which provided food and resources to the city and its surrounding lands. Governance of the city itself was delegated to lesser lords, minor nobles appointed by the barons, often their own blood relatives. These lords, though not in the direct line of succession for the baronial titles, were nonetheless entrusted with significant authority and expected to manage the affairs of the city on behalf of their liege lords. At first glance, this decentralized governance structure might appear disorganized or inefficient, but upon closer inspection, it began to make a certain kind of sense. It allowed the barons to retain direct control over their strongholds and lands while placing trusted family members in administrative positions within urban centers. Inside the carriage, meanwhile, Amelia's gentle gaze fell upon Reina, whose crimson-red eyes briefly flashed with a faint golden hue, betraying a moment of intense inner focus or perhaps frustration. "Is something troubling you, Miss Reina?" Amelia asked with polite concern. "Your eyes, just now, they were glowing gold." Reina blinked, caught slightly off guard, and quickly realized her slip-up and potential clues while using this specific divine protection. "It's nothing serious," she replied in a calm but slightly evasive tone. "I was merely utilizing a divine protection technique for reconnaissance." With a quiet breath, Reina willed another divine protection into existence, this one designed specifically to mask the coloration of her eyes while using divine abilities. It was a subtle but strategic defense, ensuring that in future moments of divine activation, no visible change would give away her intentions or abilities. Divine protection of eye coloration has been acquired. Odd Laguna, the mysterious source of divine blessings, granted the ability without hesitation. In doing so, it stripped the blessing from its original bearer without remorse or negotiation, an act as merciless as it was efficient. Back at the gates, the guards completed their verification of the necessary documents and responded with crisp, respectful salutes to the occupants of the carriage. This ceremonial deference was customary. In fact, had it been the king or queen themselves visiting a great city, identical security measures and formalities would have been enacted. Here, however, the gestures carried even more weight, given that Amelia was a royal candidate in active contention for the throne, and Reina was not only a sword saint but also an heir apparent to a duchy, wielding considerable authority over these lands. Her presence, alongside Amelia's, and by extension Subaru's delegated influence, merited such an elaborate welcome. The carriage was then directed smoothly onto the main road, flanked and led by two city guards mounted on lesser-breed ground dragons, creatures far less majestic than their high dragon counterparts but still imposing enough to serve as suitable escorts for nobility. 100 years ago, horses were still widely used across the world as the primary means of land transportation. They were dependable creatures, deeply integrated into everyday life for travel, commerce, and labor. However, all of that changed with the rise in population of ground dragons. This surge was particularly due to the introduction of a newly bred, significantly slower and physically weaker subspecies of ground dragons, one engineered precisely for its ability to reproduce easily and rapidly in vast numbers. Despite being considered a low-breed variant, even the most basic ground dragons possessed stamina, strength, and speed that far surpassed that of ordinary horses. More importantly, every ground dragon, regardless of breed, was born with an innate divine protection. These divine blessings enhanced their speed further, making them not only faster and more powerful than horses but also more comfortable and reliable as mounts or as beasts of burden. The natural advantages offered by these creatures quickly made horses obsolete in nearly every region. Use of horses as a primary form of transportation quietly faded into history. Back in the present, the two guards escorting Amelia's carriage dutifully cleared out the thoroughfare. At a junction ahead, they brought traffic to a full halt, directing both pedestrians and carriages away to prevent any obstruction or delay in the path of Amelia's procession. This level of deference was rare but not unheard of, especially when it involved individuals of high political and noble standing. Word spread like wildfire. News of the arrival of royal candidate Amelia and the Sword Saint Reina reached the ears of the townsfolk almost instantly. Residents peeked out of their windows, curious eyes watching from above. Others stepped outside, gathering along the edges of the street in hopes of catching a glimpse of their prestigious guests. Inside the carriage, Amelia glanced out the window, her delicate features reflecting a mixture of curiosity and composed warmth. Her long, silvery hair shimmered under the sunlight, and her vibrant amethyst-purple eyes scanned the surroundings. However, her distinct and mystical appearance caused some onlookers to momentarily flinch in apprehension. Despite this, Amelia mustered her usual gentle courage and offered a small wave in their direction. Her hand moved gracefully through the open window as she observed the streetscape, taking in the design and structure of the houses and buildings with interest. Other than being a bit larger and more spacious than the homes back in the village, she murmured thoughtfully, they still resemble the rural cottages. Unlike the capital, where most buildings are constructed entirely of stone and painted with vibrant colors. It is no surprise, Reina replied, her tone calm and analytical as she also looked out of the window. This is a small city, after all. There are 18 such cities scattered throughout the kingdom of Lugunica. Their main function is to serve as logistical hubs, connecting farming villages and rural settlements to the larger cities. These cities facilitate the transport and exchange of agricultural goods and other raw materials, making trade smoother and more centralized. Amelia nodded in understanding. She had read about this infrastructural structure before in various documents and official texts. But reading something and experiencing it firsthand were two very different things. Seeing the physical routes, the urban layout, and the citizens going about their lives brought new clarity to what she had only previously understood in theory. After some time, the carriage reached the small noble district located at the heart of the city. The path took them through another set of defensive walls, guarded by a more disciplined and better equipped unit of soldiers stationed specifically to protect this elite area. The moment they passed through the gate, the difference in architectural quality became apparent. The residences here rivaled those of the great cities, elegant, luxurious, and meticulously maintained. For Amelia, it was a striking reminder of the stark contrast between the lives of nobles and commoners. Previously, she had not paid much attention to such disparity. A simple girl by nature, Amelia had spent years living in a humble wooden cottage deep in the forest, accompanied only by her beloved spirit companion, Puck. Although being brought to Rosewall's mansion had exposed her to a more extravagant lifestyle, she had never truly cared for wealth or status. As long as she had a warm bed, a meal to eat, and someone to call family, she could endure any hardship without complaint. But now, as one of the royal candidates aspiring to become the ruler of Lugunica, her perspective had begun to shift. It was no longer enough to remain humble and content. She now bore a responsibility, a duty to improve the living standards of the people. Even if she could not elevate everyone to the level of nobility, at the very least she should ensure that their basic needs, safety, and sanitary conditions were sufficiently met. In fact, during her previous visit to the royal capital, Amelia had temporarily parted ways with Ram, driven by a deep curiosity and a desire to explore the vast and vibrant city on her own. After all, it was her first time in a great city of such magnitude, and everything about it, from the towering stone buildings to the bustling markets and intricate alleyways, was new and fascinating to her. However, true to the innocent and somewhat naive nature she still carried at the time, she had made a critical oversight. She ventured out without bringing any money separating from Ram, who carried all the money. Worse yet, amidst the overwhelming crowd and unfamiliar surroundings, her royal insignia, an item of immeasurable importance, was stolen from her. While these thoughts weighed on her mind, the carriage came to a gentle stop before a stately mansion. It was surrounded by a well-kept garden, neatly trimmed hedges, 2 flowing water fountains, and a sturdy fence enclosing the property. 2 guards stood vigil at the front gate, straight-backed and alert. The city escort moved ahead of the carriage and addressed them with formality and precision. Lady Amelia and Lady Reina have arrived. The lead guard announced in a firm voice. Another guard accompanying them stepped forward and presented both the official certificate and the noble insignia that verified the guests' identities. The receiving guards took the documents and placed them against a specialized magical apparatus, likely a media device, that confirmed the authenticity of the noble tokens. Once verified, they saluted sharply. With formalities complete, Amelia and Reina stepped out of the carriage gracefully. The mansion they were entering was notably smaller than Rosewall's estate. Interestingly, even Rosewall's mansion, modest by noble standards, was considered small for someone of his influence and title. This building, while less grand, held significance of a different kind. It served as a communal location where the city's most influential figures could gather, wealthy merchants, visiting nobility, local minor lords, and diplomatic envoys alike. It was a venue of status and power, previously under the exclusive ownership of Margrave Rosewall himself. Now, it functioned as a center for strategic meetings and coordination under Subaru's administration. While the surrounding villages had been under the jurisdiction of other high-ranking nobles, the city itself had been ceded entirely to Rosewall, who had expressed no objection in offering his full support to Subaru's appointment and authority here. As Reina and Amelia were escorted into the mansion's spacious guest room, they settled comfortably onto the ornate furniture. The room was quiet, filled with soft light from a large window, and modestly decorated in noble taste. Wasting no time, Reina activated her recently acquired divine protection of eye coloration, allowing her to use her recon abilities undetected. She focused her vision and extended her observation on Subaru using another divine protection. Her sharp eyes soon located Subaru and Gloria, casually entering a tavern and placing food orders. She observed them for a few seconds, then decided to end her surveillance, for now. She let out a subtle sigh and leaned back. Just then, the door to the room opened with a light creak. A middle-aged man entered. He had dusty blonde hair combed back, a well-kept brown mustache, and wore the formal attire of an administrator. "I greet you, esteemed ladies," he said with a courteous bow. "My name is Chillard, and I currently serve as the acting governor of this city on behalf of the noble houses. To be continued. A.N. I hope you liked the chapter. I saw a FIC where the MC was a former American, and he was jealous about his Indian friend having the hottest woman in the entire college with millions of followers. I was very amused, because all I think about Indians going to foreign is simply to earn money. But seriously, is this happening in foreign? I did saw some racist ramblings of a man who said their American wives were being stolen by Indians. Bruh, he was admitting that he was insecure in front of everyone, also Indians stealing foreign women. I can think women choosing foreigners are of other races, but I don't think Indians are stealing women unless you think of single women as your property. UGHH, he was being both sexist and racist. You lot change spouses as changing clothes, even I don't change that many clothes in a year than these people change spouses. That is some funny shit. But seriously, what do you think of India if you are foreigners, especially European and American? No need to mention about pollution here, and unhygienic stall foods. I am living here and I hate it more than you feel, especially when I am sick so regularly when all I do is breathe in this air. My house is daily cleaned yet some cockroaches still manage to pollute the environment. Other than these matters, there are always bad seeds or exceptional people, but I want to ask what you think generally. This a decent topic. 21 comments, 0 vote. Download the app for greater interaction. You can chat with me about my writing experience apart from the comments section. Acros_0. Download app now. 79 side chapter. The failed loops part 1. Third POV. The first loop. What is happening here? Amelia cried out in shock, her voice trembling as her wide, amethyst eyes locked onto the dying figure lying before her. Subaru, his lifeless body sprawled on the cold cobbled ground, soaked in a pool of blood that was steadily expanding beneath him. The last flicker of life in his eyes faded into emptiness just as Amelia rushed to his side, her heart pounding with dread and disbelief. "Leah, he's gone, he's dead," Puck said solemnly, his soft voice barely above a whisper as he floated beside her, gazing down at Subaru's corpse with sorrowful eyes. Amelia's entire body trembled, her lips quivered, and her hands clenched into fists. She slowly lifted her gaze and turned it toward the 3 trembling figures nearby, 3 men who stood frozen in place, their faces pale and filled with fear. "We just wanted to steal from him. We didn't mean to kill him." One of them stammered. It was Rachans, the most vocal of the trio. Their names were Rachans, Camberley, and Gaston, names that NB Subaru had once joked about, nicknaming them Chin, Con, and Ton after their odd dynamic, which Subaru also used to refer them by these names. Guilt gripped Amelia's chest like a vice. If only she had arrived sooner, if only she had moved faster, maybe, just maybe, she could have saved him. The remorse weighed heavily on her heart. Leah, this isn't your fault, he was a stranger. We didn't even know who he was, Puck said gently, his tone consoling and calm. Amelia nodded slowly, trying to accept the truth, though her heart refused to feel peace. The three thugs began backing away, their intentions clear, they wanted to flee, to escape justice for the crime they had just committed. Puck, Amelia said firmly, and the spirit nodded, understanding her unspoken command. In an instant, glimmering ice javelins materialized in the air and launched forward, slamming into the ground just ahead of the fleeing men. A burst of frost exploded outward, encasing their feet in a thick sheet of ice, rendering them immobile. They fell to the ground with loud thuds, yelping in terror and pain. You killed an innocent person, you must be punished for your actions. Amelia shouted, her voice laced with fury and indignation. Though she hadn't known the black-haired boy, there was no doubt in her mind, he was someone's son, someone's friend, someone's loved one. And now, because of their cruelty and greed, his life had been senselessly extinguished. Her heart ached with grief and revulsion. How could they kill for something as trivial as coin or possessions? She could not forgive them. She would not forgive them. The sounds of the confrontation had drawn the attention of others. Bystanders, townsfolk, and a few curious onlookers began to gather. Before long, a group of knights arrived at the scene, drawn by the thugs, cries and the faint surge of magical energy that lingered in the air. Amelia, dressed in her pale magic robe that usually cloaked her presence and kept her from being easily noticed, now stood openly exposed, her silver hair shimmering under the afternoon sun. What happened here? One of the knights asked authoritatively, stepping forward and surveying the scene with sharp eyes. Amelia quickly relayed the events, how she had found the boy dying, how the thugs had admitted their crime, and how she had prevented their escape. Her hand pointed toward the still warm corpse lying motionless on the street. The knights turned their gaze to Subaru's body. For a brief moment, their expressions displayed mild sympathy. Then, their eyes scanned his clothing. He wore strange garments, unfamiliar to them, foreign, peculiar, and clearly not of Lugunican make. One of the knights crouched beside the body and began searching through Subaru's belongings. Among them was a curious rectangular object, what Subaru might have once called a phone. The device lit up and displayed symbols they had never seen before. And then, gold, 20 holy gold coins, whispered one of the knights to his partner, barely able to conceal his excitement. The other knight's eyes widened under his helmet, a greedy grin forming on his face. By odd, did this thieves rob a noble or something? With this kind of money, we'd be set for life, he thought gleefully. Aloud, the knight maintained his official tone. Unfortunately, he is dead. Miss, you will need to come with us to provide an official statement. These 3 criminals will be taken into custody. The knights had already decided. They would lock away the thugs, file the report, and quietly claim the loot for themselves. They would keep the mysterious box like media, perhaps sell it to a collector or smuggler. As for the body, who would care about a foreigner? As long as he wasn't a Lugunican noble, no one would question it. Amelia nodded slowly, unaware of the knight's silent schemes. Her mind was elsewhere. She was hesitant, distracted by another worry that clawed at her thoughts, her stolen insignia. What should I do? She asked through their contracted telepathic link, seeking counsel from Puck. Let's give our statement and continue our search, Puck replied calmly. If the loss of your insignia becomes public knowledge, your eligibility for the throne will be questioned. People won't trust someone who can't even safeguard something so vital. Amelia sighed and nodded in agreement. Puck was right. If the world knew she had lost her royal candidate's insignia, the very symbol of her legitimacy, her chances of becoming ruler would vanish. After all, how could she hope to lead an entire kingdom when she couldn't even keep a magical trinket secure? Before she could speak again, a voice, sharp and cold, cut through the tense air. What has happened here? The knights froze in place, their backs straightening instinctively. They turned and saw a figure approaching. Lady Reina, one of the guards said quickly, snapping to attention and saluting with nervous respect. These 3 thugs are responsible for the murder of a citizen. We have detained them and will proceed with an official investigation. This young lady is the one who witnessed the crime and prevented their escape. As he spoke, he subtly shifted his stance, hiding the plastic bag filled with coins and strange objects behind his back. Reina's sharp eyes scanned the surroundings as she arrived, but her gaze quickly settled on Amelia. Recognition flickered in her expression, followed by a jolt of surprise. Isn't she one of the royal candidates? Reina wondered, her brows furrowing subtly. Is that why I've been feeling this sense of unease? For some inexplicable reason, a growing discomfort had been gnawing at her all day, a strange foreboding, as though something precious was about to be stolen, as if fate itself was beginning to slip through her fingers. She shook the thoughts from her head and turned her attention to the lifeless figure on the ground. The corpse was that of a young man, his black hair matted with blood, his expression frozen in sheer terror, the face of someone who had died in pain and confusion. His dark eyes stared vacantly at the sky above, never to see again. Miss Reina. Amelia's voice wavered, confusion clouding her features. Even the knights standing nearby were visibly stunned, because tears were streaming down Lady Reina's cheeks. Lady Reina, is something wrong? One of the knights asked in alarm, breaking formality out of sheer disbelief. They all knew who she was, Reina, the sword saint. She was a noble of a prominent duchy, a warrior without equal, and widely acknowledged as the strongest person in the entire kingdom. Even though she possessed no magical affinity, her body was host to countless divine blessings, granting her abilities so extraordinary that they often mimicked magic. She was a figure of awe and envy alike. Many revered her, others resented her, but all respected her. To most, she was cold, strict, and fiercely unapproachable. Her detached demeanor led to rumors, stories of arrogance and emotionlessness. Whispers followed her wherever she went. Even those who admired her greatness kept their distance. But now, she was crying, openly, visibly, and it made no sense to anyone. Even Reina herself seemed bewildered. You are crying, Amelia said gently, her voice soft and laced with both empathy and curiosity. Then she asked quietly, was he someone important to you? Reina blinked and touched her cheek. Moisture. Her own tears. She hadn't even noticed them. She rubbed them away slowly, still staring at Subaru's body. I'm crying. But why? Her gaze returned to the dead boy. She didn't know him. She was certain of that. I've seen people die before. Many. I didn't cry then, so why now? The thought haunted her. An unfamiliar weight pressed on her chest, an aching sadness and a hollow pang of guilt. She exhaled deeply, calming herself as best she could. I will personally oversee the investigation into his identity, she declared at last, her voice firm again, though a hint of sadness lingered. If he is a foreign noble, his family deserves to be informed. No one should be forgotten like this. The knights straightened at her words, their pride in her authority momentarily overshadowed by a flicker of nervousness. Her eyes suddenly turned to the plastic bag one of them was subtly trying to hide. Her gaze sharpened. Give me everything you recovered from the body, she ordered, her voice ice cold. The knight hesitated only a fraction of a second before complying, handing over the bag that contained Subaru's strange belongings, his phone, his wallet, a few possessions. At least we managed to keep the thieves 20 gold coins, they thought relieved. Reina accepted them silently, eyes flickering over the foreign objects with the poise of someone determined to understand. Amelia was escorted away shortly afterward to provide a brief statement. Before leaving, she glanced back at Reina several times, debating inwardly whether to confide in her, about her stolen insignia, about her fears and failures. But in the end, fear won. The fear of exposure, of humiliation, of being seen as unworthy. If I tell her I lost my insignia, she thought, I might lose my right to be a candidate. If I can't protect a single item, how can I be trusted to rule a kingdom? So she said nothing. And soon, she departed, her heart heavier than before. The next day arrived, and Reina still had not returned to the mansion. While Amelia searched desperately for clues, she discovered only 2 corpses inside a rotting slum building. One was that of a young blonde girl, the other an elderly man. Their bodies bore signs of struggle, but the thief, the one who had stolen her insignia, was already dead. With their deaths, Amelia's lead vanished. And not long after, the truth surfaced, the fact that Amelia had lost her insignia was exposed to the public. Scandal erupted. Her reputation was stained. Meanwhile, Reina stood silently before Subaru's corpse once more, gazing at the boy who had died alone in an alley, far from anyone who might have truly known him. She clenched her fists tightly, her knuckles white with emotion. I don't know who you are, she whispered, her voice barely audible, and I don't know why your death makes me feel this way, but once again, I've failed. I was slothful, distracted, and because of that, I couldn't save everyone. The weight of guilt pressed down harder. Her pride, her power, her titles, they were meaningless against the remorse festering in her heart. With a final glance, she turned and walked out of the room. Today, her duties resumed. She had not slept the night before, nor had she eaten anything since morning. But thanks to her divine blessings, she felt no physical fatigue. Emotionally, however, she was fraying at the seams. As she moved through the halls of the garrison, she passed by several knights who were speaking in hushed tones, not realizing she was nearby. They were laughing, mocking. The royal candidate who lost her insignia, what a joke. Can't even guard a glowing trinket and wants to rule a kingdom. As expected of an half-elf. Reina ignored their words, after all it didn't concern her. And then, everything changed. She froze. A wave of pure dread washed over her. Her instincts screamed danger, but not the kind she could fight with a sword. She looked around. Everything was subtly fading. The colors around her dimmed. The sharpness of sound dulled, like hearing through water. No noise. No magical flux. No divine blessing alerts. No tremors. No signs of incoming danger. It was as if reality itself was being erased. Knights and civilians nearby began to panic, screaming as they saw their hands and bodies begin to turn translucent, fading like mist. Reina's eyes widened. This wasn't magic. It wasn't a curse. It wasn't even divine intervention. This was something else. She drew her blade in a flash, unleashing a pillar of radiant light toward the unseen force responsible. The ground beneath her cracked from the sheer force. But there was no target. It was everywhere, and nowhere. The erasure continued, and for the first time in years, the Sword Saint felt fear not of death, but of oblivion. She burned through layers of reality, through space, through time, through concepts themselves, but in the end, even her defiance wasn't enough. The world began to unravel at the seams. People panicked. Chaos consumed cities. Riots ignited. Screams echoed across the land, and then, silence. Absolute, eternal silence. The world had fallen. Everything had been utterly erased. Now, what remained was a bleak, shadowy void, where the light had no place to reach. A heavy, gray fog blanketed what was once existence. There was no wind, no sound, no feeling, just stillness, as if the universe itself had taken its final breath. Reina stood amidst the nothingness, alone. Her legendary blade crumbled into dust, disintegrating within her hand, powerless against the will that had consumed everything. Her countless divine protections, the blessings that had made her a peerless force, the Sword Saint, were gone. She still retained her prowess, due to the divine protection of adaptation which itself has vanished. It was most unique of all divine protections. Even if stripped of all other divine protections, even the divine protection of adaptation itself, its effect, adaptation would persist, allowing her to endure and maintain a fragment of her extraordinary combat ability. She scanned her surroundings with narrowed eyes, her gaze landing on the only remaining thing, the boy's body. It hadn't disintegrated. Did he do this? She wondered, suspicion laced with confusion. But then, she heard it. A voice. Soft. Distorted. Terrifyingly obsessed. I love you. 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 The phrase repeated like an endless chant, spilling out from a shadowy figure drifting across the ruined world. Each word dripped with madness and longing, echoing through the void like a dirge of insanity. Reina's body began to fade, translucent and brittle like the crumbling world around her. She was outlasting even Odd Laguna, the world's governing force of fate and existence, but it meant nothing. Against the overwhelming force of the strongest authority, the authority of envy, she was powerless. Quote. Witch of envy, Reina whispered one final time, her voice trembling with despair. That name, that presence, there was no mistaking it. As her form dissolved into the void, her heart felt heavier than ever before. She hadn't just failed to save the world. She had failed to protect him. And then, she was gone. The present itself, the very moment in which they had all existed, was erased from time. Subaru's body followed, breaking apart into light and dust. Yet, his consciousness remained. In the eerie, lifeless void, the Witch of Envy slowly drifted toward the space where Subaru's remains lingered. Her mouth never ceased its chant. I love you, I love you, I love you. Every syllable trembled with obsession, with need, with overwhelming hunger. As she neared, something impossible began to happen. Piece by piece, Subaru's body began to reform, stitched together not by time or nature, but by the sheer force of the shared authority between them. The space between them grew smaller, just a few steps away. Her twisted, broken smile widened into something almost joyful. After so many years, so many agonizing centuries, she could finally see him again. Her beloved, he was her envy, the only thing she could never have. He was her pride, the only one she truly admired. He was her sloth, the reason she wished to stop time and live with him forever. He was her gluttony, the desire to be consumed by his presence. He was her greed, the one desire she could never satisfy. He was her wrath, a fire that would burn the world for daring to harm him. He was her lust, she would give her body, soul, and sanity to him without hesitation. He was everything. If only he would look at her with affection. If only he would whisper her name with those seductive lips. But then, her fantasy shattered. Fuck off, witch. Subaru's voice cut through the silence like a thunderclap. He raised his hand, trembling with defiance, and flipped her off with a middle finger. The gesture struck harder than any sword. The chant stopped. She froze, mid-step. It was as though her heart cracked into 1,000 splinters. He hated her. He rejected her. He wanted her gone. And so, the Witch of Envy relinquished control. Her madness faltered. Her will fractured. She retreated, collapsed inward, and relinquished her grip to her counterpart. Satella. The world reformed. With the Witch of Envy subdued, the chains of temporal destruction snapped back into place. Reality healed itself. Time resumed. The earth, sky, and people returned. The Witch of Envy, now sealed once again, was dragged back into her eternal prison within the Pleiades watchtower, where dark miasma oozed endlessly from her form. Satella stood silently inside their prison, cradling the fractured will of her darker self. He doesn't remember me, she murmured, sorrow in her voice. But then her eyes narrowed thoughtfully. Well, he reincarnated, so it makes sense, she reasoned. Deep inside, the envy personality stirred again, soothing itself with a whisper. Yes, he doesn't remember me. That's all. I just need to make him fall in love with me again. The madness rekindled, quiet, but insistent. Satella, the true will, sighed. She watched Subaru from afar through their unbreakable connection, forged by the authority of envy. Why is he so weak? She asked herself in dismay. Even without his authorities, he should have retained something, anything. His soul felt dim, fragile, vulnerable. She felt a twinge of guilt twist inside her heart. If I had known he would die like this, I would have given him power. I would have stolen a divine armament from one of the ruined worlds. I would have done anything. But then she remembered Flugel's words. Do not interfere. He had warned her not to touch Subaru's fate. Not to alter the natural awakening of his gate. If she ever met him again, she was to observe, nothing more. Not unless absolutely necessary. Still, if things don't improve after a few deaths, Satella mused, I'll try to give him something. Just enough to survive. She wasn't like the envy witch inside her, the maniacal, possessive, destructive half. She didn't take pleasure in his torment. She loved him. Even if that love meant suffering, she wanted to be his strength, not his downfall. She had already committed the sin of stealing him from his world. She had dragged him to this one, a world full of monsters, betrayal, and blood. He was alone. His odds were impossible. So, in the end, she had secretly shared her authority of envy, just enough to awaken an ability that would let him defy death. Not resurrection, but something different. Something terrifying. Return by death. Even Satella was shaken when she saw what it became. A power that could rewind time itself. A power to overwrite reality. A miracle. And yet, the Witch of Envy had tampered even with that, grasping control over Subaru's save points. She could also control Satella, controlling over him whenever she wanted. She controlled their timing. Satella was helpless to interfere. If she had been in control from the beginning, she might have performed a proper summoning ritual. But instead, envy found him, and in her twisted obsession, simply grabbed him from his original world, ripping him across dimensions without ceremony. An act of desperate love. Satella could do nothing but sigh in frustration. After all, that shameless, selfish woman was a part of her. Her alter ego. Still, she would watch. She would wait. And from the darkness of her sealed prison, Satella observed her beloved's path toward greatness, toward pain, and toward the uncertain future they had both chosen. To be continued. 17 comments 0 vote. 80 side chapter. The Failed Loops Part 2. Third POV. Loop 2. It hurts. It hurts so much. Why don't I just die already? Subaru thought in unbearable agony. His body was writhing in pain, and tears flowed freely from his eyes as his consciousness slowly slipped away. Everything around him became blurry as his life faded into darkness. Lying close to his lifeless body were two more corpses. One belonged to Ram, his stomach ripped open, internal organs spilling out grotesquely. The other was Felt's body. Her head had been completely severed. It was an unusual sight, considering that Elsa usually preferred slicing into her victims' abdomens. She took pride in her twisted methods and rarely deviated from them. Elsa, standing amidst the bloodshed, licked her lips with satisfaction before turning and walking out of the building. She noticed that Amelia had already managed to flee the scene. It's not like me to let people escape alive, but I suppose they're already on the main road by now, Elsa said with a disappointed sigh. Still, she had accomplished her objective, so she saw no reason to continue the chase. With nothing more to gain from staying, she decided to leave the area. At the same time, Puck, weakened and fading fast, had barely succeeded in transporting Amelia to the main road before disappearing from view. He had expended all of his energy protecting her. Amelia stumbled into the open, disoriented and panicked. Fortunately, she was still wearing her enchanted robe, which helped conceal her true appearance. Passers-by noticed her sudden appearance, and some cast curious glances her way, though none recognized her race and decided to ignore. No, zero, she cried out in desperation, her voice cracking under the weight of panic and dread. Tears threatened to fall, but she pushed them back as she ran toward a group of nearby knights that she found. Spotting them, she rushed forward and quickly explained the dire situation in the slums, how a killer was on the loose and people were dying. However, the knights didn't react the way she had hoped. When they heard that the incident had occurred in the slums, the knights had already decided to ignore it. After all, people died there every day, why should they care and dirty themselves by going there? The slums, one of them repeated, narrowing his eyes. We'll need time to mobilize a proper unit before entering that area. The killer you described sounds like the Bowel Hunter from Gusteco. We're not risking our men tonight. The earliest we can move in is tomorrow, he said, acting as if he had made a smart decision, masking his disinterest in helping her. Amelia stared at them in disbelief. Wasn't it their sworn duty to protect people? How could they just ignore what she was telling them? What are you talking about? My friend is there. He's dying. We need to save him now, she shouted, her voice filled with urgency. But the knights stood there unmoved, emotionless and indifferent. Then one of them squinted and looked at her closely. Wait a second. Your hair, it's silver. And your eyes, they're purple, he said with suspicion, reaching out and pulling back the hood of her robe to reveal her face. As soon as they saw her pointed ears and her distinctive features, realization dawned on them. A half-elf, one of the knights exclaimed, drawing his sword as he stepped back in alarm. Around them, pedestrians halted and gasped. Fear began spreading through the crowd. Amelia recoiled, startled. She quickly tried to hide her face again, pulling the robe's hood up in a panic. A silver-haired half-elf. No wonder you came to us with this story, the knight said with disgust. You're trying to deceive us, aren't you? Are you working with the Bowel Hunter? Is this some kind of trap? No, that's not true, Amelia protested. If you're not going to help, then I'll go and help him myself. She turned to leave, but another knight grabbed her arm tightly. You're not going anywhere. We suspect you're collaborating with the Bowel Hunter and trying to lure the royal guard into an ambush. You need to surrender, now, he barked at her. Let go of me, Amelia cried, struggling to free herself. But the knight only tightened his grip. If you resist, he growled, we'll execute you right here in the street. Execute me, she whispered in disbelief. Her voice was faint, as if she couldn't process what she'd just heard. The people nearby watched the scene unfold. They saw the knights abusing their authority, but none stepped forward to stop them. No one said a word. The humans around her didn't care. Prejudice against demi-humans was deeply ingrained in society. And Amelia, being a silver-haired half-elf who bore a striking resemblance to the infamous Witch of Envy, was despised even more than most. Even the other demi-humans who might have helped someone else didn't dare lift a finger for her. They, too, felt uneasy at the sight of her. Amelia stood frozen. Her thoughts raced in circles. Was Zero already dead by now? Was his pale, broken body lying in that blood-soaked wooden room? She wasn't weak. If she really wanted to, she could fight back against these knights. But without Puck beside her, without his comforting presence, she felt emotionally overwhelmed. If she attacked them now, it would only reinforce the public's fear of her. They'd see her not as a victim but as a dangerous half-elf who lashed out at authority. That was the last thing she needed. She was torn, unsure whether to resist or comply. Just as she opened her mouth to speak, another hand appeared, this one grabbing the wrist of the knight holding her. I would suggest you keep your filthy hands off my lord's guest, a stern voice said with calm authority. Ram, Amelia gasped, overwhelmed by a wave of relief. A flicker of hope ignited inside her. Ram stood tall and poised, her expression unreadable. Lady Amelia, she said in her usual dry tone, I warned you about wandering off on your own. And now look at the mess you've gotten yourself into. While she wasn't particularly close to Amelia, and in fact maintained a certain distance due to her appearance and resemblance to the Witch of Envy, Ram was no fool. She could see the bigger picture unlike her younger sister. And right now, she knew Amelia needed help. In fact, if it hadn't been for the complete absence of witch's miasma from Amelia, Rem would have likely attempted to kill her the very moment they first met. Rem's hatred toward anything that even remotely resembled the Witch of Envy ran deep, and a silver-haired half-elf would have triggered an immediate and violent reaction. It was only due to a strict combination of circumstances that Rem suppressed those instincts. Firstly, she had received firm and direct orders from her lord, Rosewall. Secondly, Puck had made a very deliberate and intimidating show of magical power, warning her not to act rashly. And thirdly, Ram had chosen to remain constantly on guard, always keep watch at her sister. Only after all of this did she abandon the idea of killing Amelia. Who are you? The knight barked, clearly agitated as he tightened his grip. Behind him, 3 other knights stepped forward and unsheathed their swords, readying themselves for confrontation. Ram, however, remained entirely calm. Without any hesitation, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a polished emblem. Holding it firmly in front of her, she presented it to the knights with an expression of cold confidence. I am a maid currently carrying out official duties under the noble house of Mathers, she stated flatly. At this moment, I am representing the authority of Lord Rosewall L. Mathers himself. You are attempting to arrest the most important guest of the current lord. May I ask, what justification do you have for such a reckless and unauthorized act? Her strong posture, unwavering voice, and the imposing presence she carried with her caused the knights to falter. They glanced at one another in hesitation. Their eyes dropped to the emblem in her hand. As knights, they had undergone formal training and were expected to be familiar with the major noble houses of the kingdom. Among those, the House of Mathers stood out prominently, on the same tier as the Karsten House and the Astria House. The emblem's authenticity was undeniable. The tension suddenly shifted. The knights instantly released their hold on Amelia, their foreheads beating with sweat. Their aggressive stance vanished as quickly as it had appeared. Amelia, still shaken, quickly began explaining everything to Ram, the entire situation, including the horrifying events at the slum. She even admitted that her insignia had been lost. Fortunately, the knights remained unaware of the true nature or significance of the royal insignia. They didn't recognize its shape, design, or magical properties. The average citizen certainly wouldn't have known either. When Ram heard this, she didn't react visibly or draw attention to it in front of the others. She kept her expression neutral, understanding immediately what had actually been lost. Internally, however, Ram was frustrated. How could things spiral out of control so quickly? First, she had somehow managed to lose Amelia, or rather, Amelia had carelessly separated from her during a crucial time. Then, she had wasted time by strolling around, completely hindered, by a particularly annoying and loud individual wearing a ridiculous helmet who kept interfering. After that, she had been leisurely searching diligently and tirelessly searching for Amelia all across the area at a perfectly acceptable pace. And now this complete disaster was what awaited her. Nonetheless, Ram took control of the situation almost immediately. She issued direct orders to the knights, invoking her authority under the noble house of Mathers. The knights, now aware of the power Ram represented, didn't dare refuse. They complied and accompanied her and Amelia toward the slums. Unfortunately, their arrival came far too late. By the time they reached the location, the damage had already been done. Amelia stood frozen in shock as she looked at Subaru's lifeless body. The blood, the broken limbs, the vacant stare in his eyes, it was too much. The corpses of the other 2 victims, Ram and Felt, only made the horror worse. Subaru's death shattered her. Amelia broke down in front of everyone, unable to contain her emotions any longer. Her mind spiraled into despair as she realized what had happened. Her insignia was missing. Subaru was dead. And worst of all, the thought kept echoing in her head. If she hadn't run away, if she had stayed behind, maybe, just maybe, Zero would still be alive. Overcome with self-blame and guilt, Amelia collapsed to the ground in tears. Her sobs echoed in the quiet, blood-stained air. All she could do was cry, her body trembling uncontrollably. Ram, seeing the emotional collapse, sighed quietly but stepped forward. Despite their distant relationship, despite her usual cold demeanor, Ram gently wrapped her arms around Amelia and allowed her to cry into her shoulder. At that moment, she didn't speak, didn't scold, didn't judge. She simply held Amelia, supporting her like a child in need of comfort. Ram felt only a faint trace of pity for the boy's fate. She looked at his corpse for a few seconds longer than necessary, then turned away. In her mind, her thoughts were cold and blunt, as always. What an idiot, she thought. If only he hadn't interfered, he would still be alive. He brought this on himself. In the end, this is the result of his own foolishness. I suppose he deserved this death. Ram didn't soften her judgment. She wasn't someone known for her empathy, and even now, faced with such a senseless death, she remained unwavering in her views. Later that night, Reina arrived at the scene. It was her day off, but she had been patrolling nearby out of habit when she heard whispers of the incident. Curious and concerned, she made her way over. When she reached the area and saw the aftermath, especially the body of Subaru, something unexpected happened. Everyone around watched in stunned silence as tears poured down Reina's cheek as if they had their own will. She didn't understand why. She didn't even know his name, had never once seen him alive. And yet, the moment she laid eyes on his lifeless body, an overwhelming, hollow feeling consumed her. Her chest felt tight, as though something essential had been ripped from it. The grief that overtook her made no sense, but it was undeniable. The night passed slowly. Amelia was inconsolable. Ram, observing from a distance, silently reached a conclusion of her own. She knew Rosewall well enough to predict his response. Now that Amelia had lost the insignia, failed to fulfill her mission, Rosewall would likely discard her. In his eyes, she would be useless. Just another failed pawn. Strangely enough, Ram didn't consider that a bad outcome. In fact, she thought Amelia's failure might be a blessing in disguise. If Rosewall abandoned her, then Amelia would no longer be a part of his twisted plans. She would be free, no longer manipulated as one of his pieces on a grand political chessboard. Meanwhile, Reina remained behind long after the others had gone. She stayed near Subaru's corpse for the entire night when it was brought to the knight's base, never leaving his side. Guilt weighed heavily on her, even though she didn't know why. She hadn't spoken to him, hadn't met him, hadn't even been involved in any part of the events that led to his death. And yet, looking at his body felt like looking at the embodiment of something precious that had been lost forever. A deep sorrow consumed her. Who was he? She whispered to herself, still staring at him. Why do I feel this way? Her knees trembled, her hands shook, and her thoughts, usually sharp and composed, were now jumbled with emotion and confusion. Oh Odd Laguna, she finally muttered, her voice cracking. Please, grant me a blessing to revive him. She had never dared to ask such a thing before. The very concept of resurrection bordered on heresy. She had always believed that bringing back the dead was beyond even the most powerful divine protections. But her heart wouldn't allow her to simply walk away. She had already been given two incredibly powerful divine protections by Odd Laguna, one being the divine protection of the phoenix, and the other being the even more terrifying divine protection of adaptation. She understood full well that she had the potential to receive any power she requested if she truly wanted to. But she had always restrained herself. She considered herself a monster, deep down. If she ever began to use her connection to Odd Laguna purely to gain power, she feared she would become exactly what she hated, a power-hungry parasite who stole abilities without thought or care. A disgusting woman driven by nothing but greed. This time, though, she was desperate. She begged, not for herself, but for a stranger she didn't even know. But Odd Laguna remained silent. Reina waited. She stood there in stillness, her hands clenched in prayer. Minutes passed. The silence didn't break. Then she felt it. Something was wrong. Her connection to Odd Laguna, something that had always felt absolute, was beginning to fade. The presence, once so strong and divine, was growing distant. But that wasn't all. The world around her, it too was changing. No, erasing. What is happening? She panicked, stepping backward as the scenery around her started to shimmer and dissolve. All across the land, people began to feel it. Confusion, terror, and awe spread like wildfire as the very fabric of existence started to unravel. Reina, in a last-ditch effort to understand what was happening, activated every divine protection she had. Her body glowed with layers of magical power, and her senses reached out across the world. She analyzed the flow of mana, time, and space, and then finally understood the truth. Time itself was being erased. And no, I can't let this, she shouted, but her voice broke off as she watched in horror. In front of her, Reed, the legendary divine sword that had once slain thousands of dragons and stood at the peak of combat in the world, crumbled into dust and vanished. If even that weapon could not survive, then nothing could. The world around her collapsed rapidly, vanishing in chunks like broken glass being swept into darkness. And yet, she persisted. Somehow, she remained. The only things left in that void were herself, and Subaru's lifeless body. For some reason, seeing that his body still remained intact gave her a strange sense of relief. She stopped resisting. There was no more point. With her strength spent and her emotions hollowed out, she simply closed her eyes and gave up. And then, she too faded, vanishing from the world as though she had never existed. Satella appeared beside Subaru's corpse in this destroyed reality. She looked down at him silently. Something stirred in her heart, longing, grief, and an unfamiliar tenderness. Why did she felt longing for him? Flugel never mentioned her and she had never met him, Satella asked herself aloud, confused. Inside her, the entity known as envy began to rise, angry, desperate, jealous. Envy screamed that only she could have Subaru. No one else was worthy. No one else was allowed near him. Satella ignored her counterpart, and thanked the great sage that she hadn't taken control of over her. When she observed Subaru's body, which had healed completely, him being merely unconscious. He's getting stronger, she whispered, astonished. Is he regaining his abilities? Relief washed over her. She had been prepared to reveal herself to him if he had died again, to form a contract, to grant him her powers directly, so he wouldn't keep dying helplessly. But now, maybe it wasn't necessary. He was becoming stronger and perhaps regaining what had been lost. Satella remembered Flugel's words clearly, don't intervene unless absolutely necessary. That was what had stopped her until now. And that was what would continue to stop her. For the time being, she decided to hold back. She wouldn't meet him. Without touching him, without speaking, she used their shared link with his authority to rewind time once more. Subaru's consciousness was pulled away from the corpse. Reality folded over itself like a page being turned in a book. Once again, Subaru awoke near the familiar fruit stand, the Appa stand, completely unaware of everything that had transpired. Satella, in turn, returned to her prison in the watchtower, where she would remain locked away. Had it not been for the shared connection of the authority of envy, even she would have been erased with the timeline. That is how strong Subaru's version of authority of envy was. Satella expectantly watched her husband silently praying, "Husband, I know it. You can do it. Show them the greatness of the great sage. I love him, I love him, I love him, I love him, I love him." Envy stirred within her. Satella replied to her annoyed, "Shut up. You shut up." She received the witch's reply. Satella blinked, her eyes stunned. Did the witch just? To be continued. Why I am receiving so few power stones. Bruh, do you not want the chaps? This chapter is 10.5 and the one promised when the chapter 10 will be finished. Officially the chapter 10 of this FIC has been finished, although it is only the raw version. For the released, our story is just on the starting bits of the chapter 10. But anyway, how do you like this story? It is not in parody but totally the canon of this FIC, it shows what has happened in these failed loops. Again 3K words. Man, why cannot you appreciate my hard work? I will go on hiatus for a week. No, 2 weeks. If you keep ignoring my FIC. HMPH. 11 comments 0 vote. 81 fuck. I took mental damage just by hearing that. ... Third POV. A middle-aged man entered. He had dusty blonde hair combed back, a well-kept brown mustache, and wore the formal attire of an administrator. I greet you, esteemed ladies, he said with a courteous bow. My name is Chillard, and I currently serve as the acting governor of this city on behalf of the noble houses. My name is Amelia, and I am one of the dragon candidates. Amelia introduced herself with a brief nod. Reina followed suit, speaking with clarity and composure. I am the current sword saint. I represent Marquis Zero, and I am here on his behalf to consolidate his rule over this city. There was a noticeable glint in the man's eyes upon hearing those words. He nodded slowly, his expression difficult to read, before speaking. I've received word that Lord Zero has officially assumed control over this domain. The power has been formally transferred to him. He paused, his voice tinged with disappointment. But to think he wouldn't visit in person. He let out a sigh. Reina's gaze instantly turned cold and sharp, her tone devoid of any warmth as she responded, My lord is currently engaged with matters of great importance, far more significant than dealing with minor squabbles. I stand here as his sword and his will. Sir Chillard, I would advise you not to overstep your boundaries. I have been granted the authority to execute those who challenge or undermine Lord Zero's rule. Chillard flinched. Amelia, who was standing beside Reina, was momentarily taken aback by the sudden escalation and Reina's direct threat. Still, she quickly composed herself, recognizing the situation for what it was. If it had been the Reina of the past, before she met Subaru, perhaps she would have tolerated the subtle insults, ignored the provocations hidden behind polite words, and walked away from power plays. She might have even overlooked personal offenses for the sake of diplomacy. But the Reina standing here now was no longer that person. She had become Subaru's sword, a protector of his ideals and ambitions, and she had run out of patience for petty political games. There was no room left for playing along with people who sought to challenge her lord's legitimacy or insult him through backhanded remarks. She had never used her authority for personal gain before. Her power had always been a responsibility, not a weapon. But now she wielded it for Lord Zero's sake. She would make it clear to everyone what it meant to be the Sword Saint. If people wanted to call her tyrannical for doing so, then so be it. Her reputation among the nobility was already damaged. Most of them feared or disliked her anyway. What difference would it make? Chillard stood silent for a moment, unsure of how to continue. His plan had been to test their limits, slowly chip away at their authority through subtle manipulation and undermining tactics. But Reina had shut him down before he could even begin. She wasn't here to negotiate or play games. She had made it unmistakably clear that she was not someone to be trifled with. Compared to her, Chillard was a minor noble with no real standing. He governed a small region, and his authority barely extended beyond local matters. Reina, in contrast, was next in line for a duchy. She was the Sword Saint, a title feared and respected across the kingdom. On top of that, she represented Subaru, who had just taken control of the entire domain. Amelia stood beside her, not just as a dragon candidate, but also as someone backed by the powerful Margrave Rosewall. By every political measure in this monarchy, Reina and Amelia stood miles above Chillard. He was outclassed in rank, power, and influence. I apologize for overstepping my boundaries, Chillard said quickly, bowing low. His forehead began to sweat visibly. He now understood clearly that Reina could kill him on the spot if she chose to, and there would be no consequences. Greed truly had no limits. Humans would risk everything, their lives, reputations, and even their common sense, for the faintest chance of gaining power. Chillard had thought he could bluff and manipulate his way into a more favorable position. But in the face of absolute authority, his schemes crumbled instantly. Meanwhile, let Betty have a taste of the food too, I suppose, Beatrice said as she sat comfortably on Subaru's lap. Subaru chuckled lightly and looked down at her. He had just sent all his spirits out on reconnaissance missions, keeping only Beatrice with him. She was different from the others. As an artificial spirit, she couldn't shift into her spirit form, so she remained by his side. Are you sure, Betty? The food here isn't as good as what we usually eat back home, Subaru replied, though he didn't object seriously. He had decided to spend some time with her before setting off to investigate potential illegal activities in the city. There was always work to do, and his responsibilities kept piling up as Lord Zero. However, no matter how busy his schedule became, Subaru always made time for the ones he cherished. People like Beatrice, people like Reina, they weren't just his companions, they were his family. And that meant something to him. Even in the middle of an increasingly complex political landscape, Subaru never lost sight of the people who mattered most. That was exactly why Subaru didn't want to leave Beatrice hanging around doing nothing. In fact, he had already planned several dates with Reina once the foundational work of setting up his company was completed, and when Amelia could handle the public speeches and social appearances on her own, she was perfectly capable of drawing crowds and support without needing him to stand beside her every time. He fully intended to enjoy his life with Reina. Why else do you think he had hired Otto? That man was there to handle the bulk of his responsibilities. Subaru had always planned to shift most of the logistical work onto him. It wasn't laziness, it was delegation. That's how a proper leader operated, after all. Betty wants to taste what her contractor has eaten, I suppose, Beatrice said, pouting slightly, her tiny arms crossed and her expression filled with exaggerated expectation. Subaru couldn't resist the cuteness. He sighed in defeat, gave her a light pat on the head, and got up to fetch some food without even arguing. He soon returned carrying a wooden tray, which held several modest but warm dishes. There was a bowl of vegetable soup, some soft bread, boiled potatoes, and a couple of hard-boiled eggs with a light sprinkle of salt. It wasn't extravagant, but it was still a few notches above the basic lunch he had at that dingy tavern earlier. Without waiting for Beatrice to ask again, Subaru sat down and started feeding her directly. Betty has never tasted such plain food before, she said, giving her evaluation, causing Subaru to wonder whether to laugh or cry at her brutally honest evaluation. Just as he finished feeding her and setting the tray aside, a sudden burst of telepathic messages flooded his mind. His elemental spirits had returned with their reconnaissance findings. Father, I have found a location where demi-humans are locked inside cages, reported Agni, her tone sharp and serious. I didn't find anything useful. I followed these sketchy guys, and all I saw was them sneaking into a bedroom with a woman while her husband was passed out drunk on the first floor. It seems they were doing it right in front of him without waking him up, said Aqua with a mischievous tone that made Subaru groan. Fuck, I took mental damage just by hearing that. Subaru complained, holding his head. Did Aqua was going to follow Tao of uselessness. I found homeless people, starving, Sylphie reported quietly, her voice calm and emotionless as always. I found a building full of, naked men and women wrestling in bed, Gia added, clearly flustered. Subaru's eye twitched. What the hell is wrong with my spirits today? Foo-foo. This concubine has located a group of nobles plotting something suspicious, Gloria reported proudly, her tone composed and elegant, like a true noble spirit. At least 3 of you brought back something useful, Subaru muttered as he gave the order for the spirits to return to his body. They each re-entered his soul one by one, curling up into dormancy to recover their strength and grow stronger for future use. Fufu, praise me, father, Gloria said, standing in front of him in her human form with a smug expression on her face. Before Subaru could respond, Beatrice gave her a sharp glare, before returning to Subaru's soul. You did a fantastic job, Gloria, he said softly, causing a faint blush to spread across her face. With the information secured, Subaru stood up. All right, let's move quickly. I want to see what these nobles are up to before I finalize tomorrow's plans. Following Gloria's lead, Subaru teleported to the location she had identified. It was an old, partially abandoned castle on the outskirts of the city. They moved silently through the corridors and made their way down into the basement level, where a small gathering was taking place in a secluded chamber. Several nobles were already seated. More arrived over the next half hour, until the group was complete. Eventually, a gray-haired man with freckles and brown eyes stood up and addressed the group. Now that everyone has arrived, he began, we can start our discussion regarding the sudden presence of the Sword Saint and the Dragon candidate Emilia in this city. He looked around before continuing, I've received the most recent updates. Apparently, they're planning to implement major reforms. Chillard contacted me via media. He claims he was directly threatened by the Sword Saint not to overstep his boundaries. The room grew tense. Presumptuous. What right does that girl have to threaten us? One of the men said angrily, slamming his fist on the table. We've ruled over this land for generations, another noble grumbled. Now we're supposed to bow down to a nobody who got promoted and a silver-haired half-elf. What kind of kingdom is this turning into? Calm down, all of you, said the freckled man. Regardless of how we feel, the fact remains, those two currently outrank us in every way that matters. In power, in influence, and in direct authority from the crown. Disobeying them outright would be suicide. Everyone fell silent at those words. After a short pause, the discussion resumed. Eventually, they reached a temporary conclusion. They would halt all their illegal activities and move all the slaves to locations outside the city. On the surface, they would obey the new regime. But once Emilia and Reina left, or let their guard down, they would resume their old operations, this time with more caution and secrecy. Hidden in the shadows, Subaru observed everything with narrowed eyes and a smirk forming on his face. These nobles seriously thought they could fool him. They believed that waiting a few weeks and laying low would be enough to escape judgment. Let them dream. He knew taking them all down at once would be troublesome. They weren't just greedy nobles, they were the current administrative machinery. Whether he liked it or not, many of them still handled critical affairs. Removing them all without a proper replacement would create chaos. Whatever, Subaru thought, I'll deal with that later. Right now, I'm going to rescue the slaves and provide relief to the poor. Once Emilia begins her speech tomorrow, I'll make my move. Gloria huffed inside his mind, clearly irritated by the nobles' arrogance. Mere mongrels, they dare think they can manipulate my father and get away with it. Soon, they'll learn the true meaning of regret when they stand against us. To be continued. A.N. Because you bastard didn't want to read chap 10.5, I had to extend chap 10, and now I will have to write chap 11 so the story continues. Seriously, I am showing what had happened and I thought it was interesting, at least I wasn't showing the same events with just different perspective. I read a RE0 FIC, the last few 5 or 6 chaps were just the earlier chaps with different POV, it made me nearly snap. We were also getting a good point and now I will have to wait weeks for the story to continue. Do you even realize how better condition you guys are getting? You are getting something new, 3k words per chap at that. But well, I guess we return 2k words with story continuation. Hehe. Ag, I am seeing many new RE0 fics. They are system related, however their system is more unique than the generic one, makes me want write new fanfics. There is also that Enkidu one, but both its plot and writing style are lackluster. It was just og plot with Enkidu. Enkidu was also nerfed heavily, and he got useless gifts while acquiring Enkidu's abilities when he had superior form of those abilities being Enkidu. The FIC Fate canon also had an interesting beginning until it went down the drain. RE0 Echoes of Fate was good, but I lost interest, maybe it was too slow pace, or the story sounded too poetic, you can try that one. It is definitely a well-written FIC. I am noticing more RE0 fics are being uploaded now. I guess getting this FIC at first rank did inspire a lot of people. Well, there are some good fics like Re. Vainglory, Natsuki Subaru with functioning phone, Re. Multiversal Cafe, Hold Let Me Cook Celestial Grimoire Re. Sage starting life for a second time, inherit by death, retribution, Aganau, vagrant royalty, Natsuki Subaru's journey to strategically capture female REINHARD, the second coming of Little King, the day I became the Witch of Envy, the legendary sword saint is not dead. All of them are cream of the crop, so if you want RE0 fix try them, all of them are updating FIC by the way. There was also that Sword Saintness Love which was inspired from a fanfic that is dropped, which was further inspired from my fanfic, the author did state that in his story and gave me the message. Truly funny. I guess finally we are getting some good fics. Still no mature Subaru. LMAO. 15 comments 0 vote.